Well, in the last hour, speaking of Russia itself, President Putin's spokesperson has been speaking, blaming the United States for the alleged drone attack on the Kremlin, saying that the decision was executed by Kyiv but taken in Washington. Now, the allegation is that the attack happened on Wednesday. It was a drone. It was shot down as it flew over the Kremlin. Ukraine has denied any involvement. President Putin's spokesperson said, and I quote, "We are well aware that the decision on such actions and terrorist attacks is not made in Kyiv, but in Washington." Well, following the incident, Ukraine was then hit by a barrage of missiles overnight into Thursday morning. Some of the pictures here on the screen of the skies above Kyiv. Zaporizhia and Odessa, also in the south, were targeted by Russia. So let us speak to our BBC Russia correspondent Sergei Goryashka, who is joining us from Riga. And Sergei, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about what the Kremlin has been saying within the last hour.
Well, the Kremlin again claims that Ukraine, the Kyiv regime, as they say, is responsible for the attack, but they, according to the Kremlin, conducted this drone attack with the authorization of Washington, D.C., so of the United States. And I mean, they are bringing the United States to share the responsibility for this public humiliation they suffered earlier with the United States, as it could be too humiliating for Kremlin to recognize that just Ukrainians did this, and probably even not Ukrainians from the army, but just some enthusiasts who managed to fly through the Russian counter-missile system inside Moscow and even inside Kremlin to hit the palace, the Putin's residence. The Kremlin, well, as we speak, the spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, did not tell what the response would and could be. He just said that it will happen in time and that would be like a symmetrical response. And they also promised that the Victory Day parade, which is scheduled on the 9th of May, will take place.
Mr. Zelensky also calling for a fully fledged tribunal to hold Russia to account for what it describes as a war of aggression. I wonder if you could just remind us, where does Russia stand in terms of the ICC?
Russia does not recognize the authority of the ICC, and now Russia is trying to mock the court's decisions, and Zelensky's appearances, I'm pretty sure that they would be mocked on today's Russian political TV shows as well. Still, Russia has imposed laws which allow to imprison people even if they ask for the decision of the ICC or other authorities, international authorities, which Russia does not take part in anymore, if they ask to implement them. So basically, if you're out on the streets of Moscow or just posting something online about that you support the ICC's decision, you could face criminal charges. And this is a very clear sign that Russian authorities are worried about this fact, and they do not want people to realize that their president is now basically under an arrest warrant, and he's considered as a criminal who needs to be brought to justice.
Okay, Sergei Goryashka, thank you very much for that. Speaking to us from Riga. Earlier, I spoke to Michael Bosakiw, who is from the Atlantic Council, and he gave me some reaction to what President Zelensky had to say.
Well, the creation of an international tribunal is a very important step in bringing Russia to justice for its many war crimes. This is something that many Ukrainians have been asking for. Look, I think the feeling here is that the wheels of justice have been turning very slowly. Already we're into year 2 of Russia's full-scale invasion. It's been a long time in the Ukrainian kind of mind, in the Ukrainian heart, which is really bleeding right now, when those, for example, war crimes in Bucha and Irpin have been committed. So on the plus side for the Ukrainians, they have a lot of expertise here built up in terms of investigating war crimes, in terms of collecting irrefutable evidence. So that should speed the process. But on a final note on this, we all know by now that Russia does not subscribe to the rules-based international order. They, for example, did not subscribe to the decisions out of The Hague in terms of the downing of MH17. They won't hand over suspects. So that's going to be very difficult for justice to be achieved in that regard.
The comments that have been coming from the Kremlin in the last few minutes, alleging that the United States, that Washington were involved in that so-called attack on the Kremlin by Ukraine, that drone attack. What did you make of the timing?
Predictable and complete nonsense. It's entirely out of the predictable Kremlin playbook. I very much believe that this was a Russian false flag operation that serves two purposes. One is to stoke the domestic audience, to further create more fertile conditions, perhaps for more wide mobilization and for an escalation of the war. But secondly, to really, this almost sends a chill down my back, quite frankly, to create the conditions for Russia to make a direct strike on an important government installation in Kyiv, perhaps even the office of the president. So it doesn't appear that this is something Ukraine had the capability of pulling off or even wanted to pull off, because